Welcome to the Witchy Work Wishes podcast, a place to find your weekly inspiration for bringing your personal witchcraft practice into your business, work, and office. Hello, and happy almost spring. Welcome back to Witchy Work Wishes. Today is all about Ostara and the Witch's Spring Reset. We have our spring equinox, but this year I would like to approach the sabbat a little differently than I have in the past. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that Ostara comes around every year on the wheel of the year. And for the last 5 years, we've talked about the history of the holiday, the symbolism of eggs and hares, the balance of light and dark, and all of the beautiful traditional correspondences that come with this turning point in the season. But this time around on the wheel, I kept thinking about something a little simpler. Spring does not arrive all at once. Yes, of course, there is a date on the calendar. There is a time on our wheel of the year, but it doesn't just burst through the door. It really just kind of sneaks in quietly. One day, the light stays a little longer in the evening. I'm sure you're feeling that the air is a little softer right now. The birds are definitely louder in the morning. And our beautiful earth just starts to stretch after the long sleep of winter. And if you are paying attention, we actually start stretching a little too. There is this subtle shift that happens in our energy around the spring equinox after months of winter where things are just, slower and quieter and more inward. We begin to feel that gentle pull towards movement again. So you know what? This year, instead of doing a traditional deep dive into the history of Ostara, I'm just going to touch on it quickly. Then I thought it might be nice for us to talk about something a little more practical and a little more personal. I would love to talk about Ostara as the witch's spring reset. But first, some general housekeeping notes for Witchy Work Wishes. Well, actually, no, not notes at all, just thoughts. Here towards the end of March, I don't know, I've been thinking about how this whole thing started back in 2022. And honestly, it feels a little surreal. At the time, I did not have some grand, polished version of what it was going to become. I did not have a production team. I still do not have a production team. Witchy Work Wishes 5 years later is still a one witch show. I didn't have a perfectly mapped out 5-year content strategy either. What I had was curiosity, and I had a notebook. That was it. That was the heart of it. I was learning, I was reading, I was exploring ideas about witchcraft and energy and folklore and magic and, the everyday life and the way those things weave into our work and creativity and our personal paths. And like a lot of witches do, I was constantly taking notes, like little observations, quotes from books, thoughts that came to me while I was working and cooking and walking outside or just sitting with a cup of coffee and thinking about how a particular idea might apply to my life and my practice. At some point I thought, what if I just shared these notes? Not as some grand authority, not as someone pretending to have everything figured out. I'm sure you guys have the vibe figured out by now. Really just as someone who is genuinely walking the path and paying attention along the way. And that was really the beginning of this podcast. It was simply me saying, here is something I'm learning right now. Let's just explore it together. Now, back then, I don't think I fully realized what would happen when you start doing that week after week. Because when you consistently show up and share what you're learning, something really beautiful begins to unfold. The topics start to kind of branch out in ways you didn't expect. One idea leads to another. A book that I read leads to a new practice in my own personal witchcraft. A question leads to a deeper conversation. And over the years, we've talked about moon phases and seasonal cycles, animal spirits and folklore, magical tools, kitchen witchery, business energy, dopamine, motivation. We just had servitors, but we talk about shadow work and the practical side of living a magical life in the real world. And when I look back at the collection of episodes now, it just kind of looks like a map of curiosity. Each episode marks a moment where I was exploring something new, asking a question, or, just trying to understand how a particular idea could fit into the modern life. of a witch who also has a job and responsibilities and a calendar full of very, very practical things. Because that's always been part of my world too. I run a bookkeeping and payroll company. I manage clients and spreadsheets and deadlines and the very real structure of a business life. And somewhere inside all of that, there's also this thread of magic, intuition and energy and curiosity about the unseen layers of how we move through the world. This podcast has really been the place where those two sides of life have met. But something else happened along the way that I did not fully anticipate when I started pressing the record button back in 2022. You showed up. Listeners started writing in, sharing their own experiences, their own questions, their own magical experiments and ideas. And slowly it dawned on me that this wasn't just me talking into a microphone anymore. It was a conversation. Even though, yeah, I know I'm the one recording the episodes, the energy of this podcast is very much a circle, a group of curious witches who are exploring things together. And that realization, well, it has been one of the most meaningful parts of this journey for me. Because I'm not standing at the front of the room pretending to have all of the answers. I'm walking the path too. I am making mistakes and then making corrections. I am testing things out just like you are. Every episode is really just me saying, yeah, hey, here's something I'm learning right now. Here's something I'm experimenting with. Here's an idea that caught my attention. And the beautiful thing is that you are right there with me, listening, thinking about it, trying things in your own life, maybe agreeing, maybe questioning, hopefully adding your own valuable perspective. So when I say we're on this journey together, I truly, truly mean that. And now here we are in the 5th year of this podcast. And oh my gosh, you guys, when I look back at the early episodes, I can see how much has grown. The conversations are deeper now. The topics have expanded. My own understanding of certain things has shifted and evolved. But you know what? The heart of it really is still the same. I'm still the same person with the notebook. I'm still jotting down ideas and reading books. I'm still noticing patterns in the seasons and in folklore and in the strange little moments where magic just seems to peek through everyday life. And then sitting down at the microphone and saying, okay, hey, let's talk about this. So if you've been here from the early days in 2022, oh my goodness, thank you. And if you're newer to the podcast and just joined somewhere along the way, thank you also for stepping into the circle. Because this whole thing, every episode, every topic, every rabbit hole of curiosity, well, it really is just a shared journey of learning and wondering and exploring what it means to live a thoughtful, magical life. And honestly, I have a feeling we are just getting started. I think when you're, in the middle of creating something week after week, you don't always realize just how far you've come. And I'm not sure why I'm getting all nostalgic about it right now. Actually, no, that's not true. I do know. I do know why. It's because I recently stumbled across a statistic about podcasts that just made me stop and think. Did you know that the average lifespan of a podcast is actually pretty short? Most podcasts never make it very far. In fact, most of them stop after just a handful of episodes. I think a lot of people start a show maybe with, a bunch of excitement, right? They record a few conversations, they upload them, and then life gets busy. Oh gosh, we know that feeling, right? The momentum fades and the podcast quietly disappears. There are shows I've listened to that have done just that. I loved them while they were happening, but then like poof, they're gone. And just like that, no new episodes. So, it got me thinking, and I wanted to look up some statistics. It seems as though the average podcast lasts somewhere around 7 to 10 episodes before it stops. That's it. 7 to 10. When I first read that, I sat there for a moment thinking about our little corner of the podcast world here, because we passed that number a long, long, long time ago. Then there's another milestone that podcast creators talk about. If a show reaches 100 episodes, it is considered an established podcast then. I guess that's the point where people start realizing that it isn't just a short-term experiment anymore. It's something that has real staying power. Now, podcast hosting Platforms like, Buzzsprout, along with, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, they have looked at the data over the years, and the pattern is pretty consistent. Rough breakdown of a podcast lifespan is this. About 50% of podcasts stop after the first 3 to 7 episodes. That's huge. Huge. Many of the shows, though, never make it past 10 episodes. Only around 20 to 25% of them make it past 20 episodes. And I really find that hard to believe, unless there's just so many podcasts out there that I didn't even know existed. But guess what? Fewer than 10% of the podcasts out there, like all of the podcasts, fewer than 10% actually reach 100 episodes. 10%, you guys. Like, what? So, of course, I wanted to know the why. I mean, I'm living it directly, so I guess deep in my heart, I already know. But here's what they said. The main reason most podcasts fade out early is because of 4 things. The first one is consistency is hard. Recording, editing, uploading, and promoting takes time every week. Second one they mentioned was that people underestimate the workload. Like, it's not just talking. There's research, writing, scheduling, artwork, and publishing. The third one, they said, just growth takes time. Many new podcasters expect fast audience growth and they get discouraged. And the last one they mentioned, the fourth one, is just that life gets busy. Work, family, other projects, they easily push recording aside. But they also say shows that last, like our witchy work wishes here, usually share a few things in common. They say that the host is genuinely curious about the topics, which I am. They say the show evolves naturally over time, which it has. They say the audience becomes a community rather than just listeners, which you are. And they say the host treats it as a long-term creative practice, which I do. So, okay, felt good. And when I look at where we are now, it honestly fills me with so much gratitude. This podcast started back in 2022 as a pretty simple idea. I have been learning so much about witchcraft and folklore and magical practices and the way energy shows up in our everyday life. And like many witches do, I was constantly taking those notes. I was writing those things down, jotting little observations in the notebooks. And then at some point I thought, what if I just share all of this with you? Not as someone claiming to have all the answers, just as someone who is learning, exploring, and thinking things through out loud. That's really how this began. Just me sitting down, turning on the microphone and saying, here's something interesting I've been learning. Let's talk about it. I know there are a lot of podcasts out there, and the fact that you choose to sit down each week and listen to Witchy Work Wishes, you guys, it means the world to me. And whether you've been here from the beginning or you are a brand new listener who just found the show, I am grateful you are here. This podcast started as such a small little idea that I had years ago, just wanting to talk about witchcraft and share the things I was learning. And somehow along the way, it just grew into this beautiful community of thoughtful, curious, magical people who are all exploring this path together. I know some of you listen while you're driving to work. Some listen while you are cooking dinner or walking the dog. Some of you are sitting with a cup of tea right now in your journal, and I love that. I know some of you are part of our Patreon family and support this podcast directly with the work and spells and magical exercises that we create each month. However you found your way here, I really want you to know how much I appreciate the time you spend with me every week. This little corner of the world that we've built together is something really special, and I am incredibly grateful for the kindness and encouragement and support that you share with me and with each other. I love, love, love our Witchy Work Wishes family. It's cozy, it's safe, and it's ours. Like, it's our circle of magic. So thank you for supporting this podcast, truly. Thank you for being a part of our little circle here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being curious. Thank you for being the kind of community that keeps showing up for these conversations. Because the truth is, this podcast might have started as my notes, but somewhere along the way, it became our journey. And if these statistics say most podcasts fade away after just a handful of episodes, Well, then I'd say we are doing something pretty special here. We are already well above the average in the little top 10% of podcasts, and we're still going strong. You know what? We're going to have to plan a big party when we reach 200 episodes, which, oh my gosh, you guys, it's certainly coming up. Today we are on episode number 179. So what? That puts us in line for a big celebration this summer. So let's go. Let's go. Now, I do have to tell you, I have some really fun things brewing for the spring and summer months, a couple of little test projects that I've been dreaming about, and finally feel ready to explore. And you know how it goes with me. Ideas start as a spark, and then suddenly we are building something magical together. So over the next few weeks, I am going to start planting a few seeds and giving you little updates as these ideas start to take shape. One of them I'm very excited about, and this is a possible in-person gathering. A workshop, an event specifically for the business witch in all of us. Yes, the witches who are building things, the witches who are employees just as much as the witches who are running businesses. This is for the witches with spreadsheets, strategy, creativity, and intuition all sitting at the same table. Now, right now, this is just kind of a test run idea, kind of like a little beta project launch I'm exploring. But if you are in the state of California in the United States, especially anywhere around the Santa Barbara area, or honestly, you know what? If you're someone who loves a good magical road trip, this might be something you want to keep your eye on. Because what I'm envisioning is a day or two where we gather, talk about the intersection of magic and business, work with intention, strategy, and a little bit of spellcraft, and just spend time with other witches who understand what it's like to build something meaningful in the world. So consider this the first little whisper of that idea. I will share more ideas as it develops, but I just wanted to plant the seed with you first. We have our spring equinox, and it gives us this beautiful moment of balance. Perfect balance, really. Day and night standing equal for just a brief moment. And that balance creates the perfect little pause point in the year. A moment where we can step back, take a breath, and look around our lives the same way the earth is really looking around right now. What needs refreshing? What tiny seeds are we ready to plant for the months ahead? It's quiet magic. It's the magic of small beginnings. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do as witches during this season, during spring in Ostara, is simply reset ourselves the same way the earth is resetting all around us. So today, we're going to talk about that. We are going to talk about cleaning spaces, resetting our magical practice, noticing the seasonal shifts happening right outside our doors, and planting the kind of intentions that we would like to see grow over the next 6 months. And really, this might be one of the most practical Ostara conversations we've had together yet. So grab your tea, grab your coffee, grab your big glass of water, and settle in. Let's talk about the witch's spring reset with Ostara. Okay, before we really get into this idea, the witch's spring reset, let's talk for a moment about where Ostara actually sits on the wheel of the year. Because I think understanding that placement helps us understand the energy that we will be or can be working with. If you are newer to witchcraft or seasonal practices, the wheel of the year is simply the cycle of 8 seasonal celebrations that mark the turning of the earth as it moves through the year. It's a way of observing nature and aligning our spiritual life with the rhythms that are already happening all around us. Most people, most people start the wheel with Samhain, which falls at the end of October and marks the witch's new year. That's really the doorway into the darker half of the year when, the nights grow longer and the earth begins to rest. Then we move into Yule, the winter solstice in December, when the longest night gives way to the return of light. After that comes Imbolc in early February, which if you have been following me for a long time, That's when I start the wheel. And it carries that first whisper of spring, the stirring beneath the soil, the amazing promise that winter will not last forever. And that brings us to where we are right now with Ostara, the spring equinox. This is the moment on the wheel when day and night stand in perfect balance. Just for a brief moment. In the turning of the year, this is when light and dark are equal. And up to this point, the light will continue to grow and grow, get stronger and stronger with each passing day. Now, on the wheel of the year, Ostara sits right between Imbolc and Beltane. Imbolc, right, is the stirring, it's the first tiny movement of life returning. And Beltane, which arrives at the beginning of May, well, that is the full celebration of fertility and blooming life. Ostara is the space between these two energies. It is the moment when the earth has clearly awakened, right? We are awake, but everything is still super young and tender. Seeds are, of course, beginning to sprout. The days are stretching a little bit longer, and the world is slowly filling back up with color and movement again. Now, if you are really paying attention and you are in tune with your own personal body and your own personal space, you can feel that same rhythm happening in your own lives too. Like we're not in the deep stillness of winter anymore, but we are also not yet in the full abundance of summer. We are in that beginning growing season phase. And that's why this Sabbath is such a powerful moment for a reset, because this is the part of the year where the earth itself is preparing for growth. Everything that will bloom later starts with a very small movement right here at Ostara. Now, something that often comes up around this Sabbath is the name itself. Like, where does the word Ostara actually come from? Because if you start reading about the spring equinox in older historical sources, you're going to notice something pretty interesting. The ancient pagan cultures absolutely celebrated the spring equinox. But the name, like the specific name Ostara, it really doesn't show up very often in the early records. The name most likely comes from a reference written by an 8th century monk named Bede. Bede wrote about an Anglo-Saxon spring festival that he said was connected to a goddess named Eostra. According to his writings, this festival was held during the month, I think it roughly corresponds to April, like March, April, but it honored the return of light and the fertility of the land. Over time, modern pagan traditions and our contemporary witchcraft practices began using the name Ostara to refer specifically to the spring equinox Sabbath on the wheel of the year. So, the name itself carries the same roots as words like Easter and really even the word east, which is the direction of the rising sun. So the name has been associated with themes of dawn, renewal, certainly the return of light, all for good reason. It fits beautifully with what's happening in nature during this time of the year. But regardless of the name, cultures really all over the world have celebrated this seasonal turning point for thousands of years. The balance of day and night, the warming of the earth, and the beginning of the growing season are all things human beings have noticed and honored for a very, very long time. And that's really the part of Ostara. It's not just a date on the calendar, it is the moment that we can feel the earth waking up again. So, who exactly is the goddess Eostra? Well, Eostra, let's see. So, I can't find a bunch of information on her. The main historical reference to Eostra comes from the historian Bede that I just mentioned. But Bede's writings is really the only clear historical mention that I can find. There are not a lot of surviving myths or stories about Eostra the way we have with, like other deities like Freya or Hecate or Bridget. Because of that, I think modern witches and, pagan practitioners kind of understand Eostra a little differently. Instead of thinking of her as like a fully documented mythological figure, I think many see her more as a symbolic embodiment of spring itself, like, the energy of dawn and fertility and renewal. She's the awakening of the land. We have someone kinda similar to this with the Cailleach, although she has a bunch of documentation on her. In Celtic folklore, the figure most often associated with winter is the Cailleach. She is found in Irish and Scottish mythology. We talked about her last fall. Her name essentially means the veiled one, or, the old woman. And she is often described as a powerful crone goddess connected to winter and storms and mountains, and really the shaping of land itself. So, in many traditions, she is seen as the ruler of the dark half of the year. So now with, spring and Ostara, Yastra, she is the ruler-ish of this part of the year, if you want to look at it that way. Now, one thing that can get a little confusing when we talk about Yastra is that I think a lot of people believe she is a Celtic goddess, but historically, yeah, that doesn't appear to be the case. Yastra is usually connected to the Anglo-Saxon or Germanic traditions of Northern Europe rather than the Celtic ones. So the monk Bede was specifically describing a festival among the Anglo-Saxon people of England when he talks about Yastra. Now, Celtic mythology has its own seasonal figures and deities, but Yastra, yeah, she is not one of them. She isn't one that shows up in these surviving Irish or Scottish mythological texts. So when we modern witches celebrate Ostara on the Wheel of the Year, I think we're just really working with a blend of traditions right now. The seasonal moment itself, for sure, right? The spring equinox. This was recognized and celebrated by many ancient cultures. But the name Ostara and the connection to Yastra, they come with more Germanic folklore and later, modern pagan traditions. That's pretty cool, right? That's fun. That's a blending of traditions in our contemporary, modern witchcraft world. The important part isn't necessarily the exact historical label, it's the way we connect with the seasonal shift happening all around us. Because whether you call it the spring equinox, Ostara, or I don't know, maybe you call it simply the return of the light, the earth is still doing the same beautiful thing right now. It's waking up. Now, there is another story that floats around this time of year that many of us have heard and told. It's the tale about the goddess Iastra turning a bird into a rabbit, and that rabbit then laying colorful eggs each spring. It is a charming story. You will see it repeated in a lot of modern Ostara articles and social media posts. It is one I have told in previous years' Ostara episodes. I personally love it. I love it. The only early reference we really have to Iastra comes from that 8th century monk, though, Bede, and he never mentioned rabbits, birds, or egg-laying hares. Those details do not appear in his writings at all. The rabbit and bird story actually seems to have appeared really much later, like 19th and 20th century stories, as people began creating folklore explanation for why rabbits and eggs became associated with springtime celebrations and Easter traditions. So while it is a super sweet piece of storytelling, and I do love to include it in my personal practice, it's probably better understood as a modern myth inspired by older seasonal symbols rather than an ancient legend. But really, even if the story, itself is newer, the symbols behind it are very, very old. Rabbits and hares have long been connected with fertility and abundance because of how quickly they reproduce. Eggs have been symbols of new life and potential for thousands of years across many, many cultures. So when we see eggs and rabbits and birds and all of these lively creatures showing up in springtime traditions, really they're just reflecting the same thing the earth is doing all around us. Life is returning, seeds hatching, and the world is waking up again. Now, when we talk about the spring equinox, what we're really talking about is a moment of balance. On this day, the length of daylight and the length of night are almost exactly equal. For just a brief moment in the turning of the year, light and dark stand in perfect equilibrium. Just saying that out loud feels super good. I think we all strive for some type of balance in our lives. There's something really beautiful about that. Because if you think about the journey we've been on since the winter solstice, The light has been slowly returning for months now. Day by day, minute by minute, the sun has been reclaiming its space in the sky. The equinox, the spring equinox, well, this is the moment where we pause and say, okay, here we are. The scales are balanced. From this point forward, the light continues to grow stronger, the days stretch longer, the earth begins to warm more and more, plants start pushing up through the soil, and animals become more active again. It really is the beginning of the true growing season. This is why I think the equinox can feel like such a natural reset button for all of us and our practices. Nature is literally recalibrating itself. The earth has finished its deep winter rest, but it hasn't burst into the full abundance of summer, and we get to stand at that doorway of growth right now. When we align ourselves with that moment, we can use this same energy in our lives. The springtime change becomes a chance to pause and ask ourselves a few simple questions. Where am I right now? What feels balanced in my life? What feels out of alignment? What would I like to grow over the next 6 months? Because from Ostara forward, the wheel is turning towards expansion, towards activity, towards, life unfolding outward again. And sometimes all we need is a moment like this, right now, this moment of balance, to kind of step back and look around and deliberately reset the direction we are moving, just like the earth does. One of the most natural ways we can work with the energy of Ostara is by resetting our physical spaces. This is something human beings have been doing for a very long time. I think the tradition of spring cleaning shows up in cultures all over the world. After months of winter where our homes are closed up and we are spending more time indoors, spring arrives and there is this natural urge just to open up the windows, move things around, and just freshen everything up. You can almost feel your house breathing again, can't you? Like for witches, this kind of seasonal cleaning can become a really simple but powerful form of practical magic. Does not have to be complicated. We talked about being decluttered witches a while back and, having organized space, how much that matters. An organized mind matters too, though. And the two intertwine a bunch, don't they? But for right now, sometimes it's as simple as clearing off a cluttered table, washing our altar cloths, reorganizing the tools we use in our magical practices. Oh, maybe it's going through your herbs and seeing what needs replacing, or wiping down candles and jars that have been sitting quietly all winter. There is something about physically moving things in our environment that also shifts our energy. When we tidy up our spaces, we create room for something new to enter. And this is exactly the kind of work that fits with the, energy of Ostara. We are not forcing growth, well, not yet. Our big fire festival is coming on May 1st. Right now, we are just simply making space for it. I've been noticing this in my own home and backyard lately too. As the days start getting longer, everything outside is just starting to wake up. The birds are definitely louder. Oh my gosh, I even got some baby birds already. But the air feels different, right? Even the chickens. The hearth and hen ladies are behaving a little differently with the extra daylight. That shift reminds me that this is, the time of year to give things a little refresh. Organizing the spaces where life is happening again. The kind of work that prepares us in our homes and our surroundings for everything that comes next. Ostara is the season of growth beginning. Well, once we've refreshed our physical spaces, Ostara also gives us a really nice opportunity to reset our magical practices. Winter tends to draw our magic inward. During the darker months, we often focus on reflection, shadow work, rest, and that deep personal introspection. The energy is quieter then. It's slower, sometimes maybe a little heavy, and that's exactly what the season is meant for. So when we reach the spring equinox, the wheel begins turning towards movement again. This is the point of the year where the magic starts shifting from inward reflection to outward creation. And that makes Ostara a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time to look at our practices and ask ourselves a few questions. Like, what feels alive in my magic right now? What feels maybe a little stale or neglected? What practices would I like to bring back into my life as we move into the brighter half of the year? I'll give you a little spoiler alert about something I'm personally evaluating right now in my own magical practice. The many, many jars of moon water that seem to have quietly accumulated in my house. Please tell me I'm not the only one who has done this. Do you guys have multiple jars too? Because at some point I realized I have jars from different moons, different intentions, different seasons, and they are all sitting on a shelf looking very mystical and very witchy, which I love. Like, I love walking by them. The visual is amazing. But then I caught myself thinking, like, what exactly am I doing with all these jars? Like, what are we doing here? Because if we're honest, sometimes as witches, we are just really good at collecting magical things, but not always as good at actually using them. And moon water, at least for me right now, is just one of those things that has easily become a beautiful little collection of jars that I have kind of forgotten about. So, one of the resets that I'm doing in my magical practice right now is looking at those jars and asking a very practical question. How am I actually going to use this energy? Because moon water isn't meant to just sit on a shelf forever looking pretty. It is meant to be used. It is meant to be part of our rituals, part of our daily practices, part of the way we move magic through our lives. So, guess what? I have decided I'm going to do an entire episode about this very soon. All of the different ways we can actually work with and use our moon water, incorporate it into our practice, and make sure it just becomes something living and active instead of just a forgotten jar from one of last year's full moons. But for now, let's just say, as part of my Ostara reset, I am doing a little inventory of my magical tools, and those jars of moon water are definitely on the list. But let's see, back to organizing. I think for some of us, the organizing side of things might just mean refreshing our altar space. Maybe it's starting a new page in our grimoire. For others, it might be reconnecting with daily rituals that fell away during the busy winter months. Maybe it's pulling out a deck of cards again, lighting a candle in the morning, brewing a cup of tea with intention. I don't think it has to be dramatic right now. Sometimes the most meaningful resets are pretty small. You might even think of Ostara as the moment where we begin planting magical seeds. Just like the garden outside hasn't fully bloomed yet, our intentions are still in their early stages too. But the important thing is that they've been planted, right? From here, the wheel keeps turning, the light keeps growing, and the energy we begin cultivating now has the entire spring and summer to develop. This is important. What we are doing now matters later. And if you follow moon magic and practice lunar witchcraft the way I do, here's another way to think about Ostara that might just really click. Think of the spring equinox as the new moon phase of the year. When we work with our lunar cycles, we know the new moon is the moment where everything is still very quiet. The sky is still dark. The energy is inward, and we are setting intentions for what we want to grow during the weeks ahead. Nothing is visible yet. The seeds are planted, but they're still beneath the soil. And Ostara carries a very similar feeling on, just a larger annual scale. We're stepping into the beginning of growing season, but we're not at the blooming moments yet. We're not in the waxing phase of the moon's annual journey yet. We're not at Beltane's full fertility, waxing energy, and celebration, or the lush abundance of summer and the full moon energy. We are standing right at that quiet point where the intentions for the season are just being planted. The earth is doing the same thing. Seeds are going into soil, roots are starting to stretch downward, tiny shoots are preparing to push upwards towards the sun, but most of that work really is still invisible. And that's exactly how the new moon feels too. So if lunar magic is already part of your practice, Ostara can become the moment where you ask yourself the same questions you would ask during any new moon ritual. What do I want to grow this season? What intentions am I planting for the months ahead? What direction am I setting for the next cycle of my life? Because from here, just like the waxing moon, the energy of the year will begin building and building, moving us towards Beltane. towards summer, towards the full flourishing of everything we start right now. Ostara is simply the moment where we plant the seed. So if your magical practice has felt be a little quiet lately, that's okay. It has in my practice too. Ostara is simply the invitation to wake it up again, one small ritual at a time. Now, another way I really like to experience Ostara is through what I jokingly call my backyard witch perspective. Because one of the easiest ways to connect with the wheel of the year is simply by paying attention to what is happening right outside our own doors. We don't always need elaborate rituals or big ceremonial setups to feel the turning of the seasons. I think sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just observe nature doing its thing. And this time of year, there are clues everywhere that the season is shifting. The light in the morning feels different. The air, I know I keep saying that, but it is soft, right? It's got a little softer edge to it that tells you winter is loosening its grip. You start seeing more movement in the trees and along the ground. With the days getting longer, my hens have become more active. There's more, scratching around in the yard, more wandering, more curious little investigations of every corner of the garden. Even their egg-laying cycles begin to shift again as daylight increases. It's such a good reminder that the wheel of the year is not just a spiritual idea that we talk about on podcasts. The animals feel it. The plants feel it. The earth is responding to it in very real ways. And when we take a few moments to step outside and notice those changes, it brings us back into alignment with that natural rhythm. It's simple, it really is, but that simplicity is actually where a lot of the magic lives. When we start observing the land around us, even if it's just a small backyard or a balcony garden, we begin to see the same pattern repeating itself every year. Rest, stirring, growth. And Ostara is the moment where that growth begins to show itself again. Now, if this way of observing the season sounds familiar to you, it's because we actually just talked about this quite a bit in the podcast episode we did called Kitchen Witch Planting Season. In that episode, we explored the idea that gardening, whether it's a big garden, a few pots on the patio, or even just tending herbs in the kitchen window, it is one of the most direct ways we can connect with the rhythms of the earth. Because when you garden, you're not just reading about the seasons, you are participating in them. You start noticing things you might not have paid attention to before. Well, the temperature of the soil, the way the sunlight moves across your yard throughout the day, the timing of when certain plants begin waking up each year. And Ostara is one of those moments where that awareness really begins to kick in. It's the point in the year where we start thinking about what we want to plant. What seeds might go in the soil? What spaces need a little cleaning up? Or goodness, in my case, a lot of cleaning up. And preparation after the winter months. And even if you're not someone who keeps a traditional garden, I think the same principle still applies. The earth around us is beginning to prepare for growth. And we can participate in that energy in whatever way makes sense in our lives. Maybe that is planting herbs. Maybe it is tending a small garden bed. Maybe it is simply stepping outside more often and noticing what the land is doing. Or in my case, you know what? Sometimes just spending time outside in the backyard with the chickens, cleaning out the coop, spreading some fresh straw, and just watching how much more active they become as the daylight stretches a little longer. All of those things are a part of the same seasonal rhythm. And that's really what that Kitchen Witch planting season episode was about, working with the earth instead of just observing it from the sidelines. Because when we do that, the wheel of the year stops being something abstract. It really becomes something we can actually feel unfolding all around us. Well, all of this brings us to one of the most beautiful ideas, I think, that is connected with Ostara, and that is planting seeds. Again, not just the garden. I'm not talking about just physical seeds, but in our lives too. Our intentions work very much the same way the little garden seeds work. You just have to ask yourself, what would I like to grow over the next 6 months? Maybe it is something in your personal life. Maybe it is something in your magical practice. Maybe it is one of the goals you set back in the quiet months of winter. Maybe it's a creative idea, a project, a new habit, a dream that has quietly been waiting for the right moment to begin. It could be a daily ritual, a new skill, a commitment to spend more time outside, a a decision to nurture something that matters to you. And just like in the garden, once the seed is planted, we don't just stand there demanding that it grows faster. We tend to it, we give it light, we give it time, and we trust the process. That's the real magic of Ostara. It's a reminder that growth doesn't happen all at once. It begins quietly beneath the surface, and then little by little, the season carries it forward. So as we step into the brighter half of the year, maybe just take a few moments to sit with that question. What seed would you like to plant right now that your future self will be grateful for when summer arrives? Because the wheel of the year is already turning and the growing season has officially begun. There is another layer of this conversation that I think is really important to talk about, especially for those of us who are practicing magic while also living very normal, very busy, very corporate lives. Because not all witches are wandering around forests all day and tending to large gardens. Yes, of course, that is my goal. But right now, in my world at least, it is what it is, a goal. A lot of us are sitting in offices right now, running around, attending meetings, working on spreadsheets, and responding to emails. And that is okay. You can absolutely work with the energy of Ostara as a business witch. In fact, the spring equinox is a really powerful time to look at the professional side of your life. Remember, this is the beginning of the growing season. Nature is preparing for expansion, development, and movement forward. And that same energy can apply beautifully to our work lives. Ostara can be a moment where we pause and ask ourselves a few practical business questions. What projects do I want to grow this year? What ideas have been sitting quietly that are ready to move forward? Where in my career or business do I want to see growth over the next 6 months? Now, for those of us who run businesses, this can be a great time to review goals, adjust strategies, or start new initiatives. Think of it like planting professional seeds that will bloom later in the year. But even if you work in a corporate environment or, like a traditional office job, you can still work with this energy in really nice, subtle ways. You might reorganize your workspace, clean out your desk drawers, refresh your planning systems, set intentions for projects you would like to develop. These small actions mirror exactly what the earth is doing right now, preparing, organizing, getting ready for growth. And honestly, this is something I think about a lot in my own life because I spend a good portion of my week working in the very practical world of bookkeeping and business management. Spreadsheets, payroll reports, financial planning. It's not exactly what people imagine when they think of a witch, but that's the beauty of modern witchcraft, isn't it? Magic is not separate from our everyday lives. It is woven right into them. So, you know what? When Ostara arrives, I am not just thinking about gardens and flowers. I am also thinking about what I want to grow professionally, what projects I want to nurture, what direction I want the next season of my work life to move in. Because the same energy that grows forests and gardens can absolutely grow ideas, businesses, and dreams too. So if you like the idea of working with Ostara from a business witch perspective, here are a few simple ways you can bring this seasonal energy right into your office and workspace. First, reset your workspace. Just like we talked about with the spring cleaning at home, the same idea applies to your desk or office. Clear off clutter, organize your files, wipe down your workspace. Maybe even add something that reminds you of the season. A small plant, fresh flowers, even just opening the window. Literally opening the window and letting in fresh air. A clean space creates room for new ideas. Second, review what you've been working on. Ostara is a great time to step back and look at your projects the same way a gardener looks at their beds before planting. What's working? What needs adjusting? What's ready to grow? Third, plant a professional seed. Choose one thing you'd like to start or nurture in the coming months. Maybe it's a new service, A creative project, or a course you want to take, or maybe it's a business idea you've been thinking about for a while. You don't have to build the whole thing right now, just plant the seed. Fourth, refresh your planning system. Spring is a perfect, wonderful time to update calendars, reorganize planners, and get clear on the direction you want the next few months to move. Think of it as aligning your goals with the energy of the growing season. And fifth, set a quiet intention for growth. Before you begin your workday around the equinox, take a moment to pause, light a candle, take a deep breath, and set a simple intention for your professional life this season. Something like, may my work grow steadily and bring value to the world. None of this has to be elaborate. I really do think sometimes being a business witch simply means paying attention to the rhythm of the seasons and allowing that rhythm to guide how we move through our work. Because growth in nature and growth in our careers often follow the same pattern. It all starts with a seed. That is what being a modern witch often looks like for many of us. One minute we are setting intentions for the growing season, right? The next minute we are answering emails and balancing spreadsheets or cleaning up the chicken coop. It's not always mystical candles and moonlight. Sometimes the magic happens between a cup of coffee, a stack of paperwork, and a few curious hens wandering around the backyard. And you know what? That's okay. The real beauty of witchcraft is that it doesn't require us to step outside our everyday lives. It invites us to bring a little intention into the lives we are already living. Well, my friends, that is our Ostara conversation for today. I hope this episode encourages you to slow down for a moment and notice the quiet turning of the season happening all around you. The days are stretching a little longer, the air is softening, and the earth is beginning its steady movement back to life and color again. Sometimes the most meaningful way to celebrate Ostara is simply just opening that window, stepping outside for a few moments, or just spending a little time putting your own spaces back in order as the year begins to unfold again. However you choose to move through this season, thank you. I am so grateful you are here sharing this journey with me. Thank you, thank you, thank you for spending a little time with me today. Now, if you would like to stay with me for a little bit more, I do have an Ostara poem and the moon update for all of us this week of March 18th. I'm going to go grab those notes and I will be right back. Let's start with the poem, and it goes. The wheel has turned, the light returns, the quiet earth begins to stir. The winter winds have lost their hold, and softer songs replace their whir. The days stretch out with golden thread, the night steps back to share the sky. For just a moment, dark and light stand side by side as time walks by. The soil beneath the waking ground holds tiny dreams we cannot see. 1,000 seeds are tucked away, preparing what the world will be. No trumpet sounds the start of spring, no grand parade comes marching through. It enters like a whispered spell, carried in the morning dew. A bud appears upon a branch, a bird returns with cheerful call, and somewhere in the warming earth the smallest roots begin their crawl. So plant your hopes as spring begins, no matter if they're large or small, for every garden starts this way, a quiet seed beneath it all. And as the wheel continues on, through blooming fields and summer sun, remember every forest grew from something small that once was one. So greet the light, step gently forth, let patient magic guide your art, for Ostara plants the seeds of spring in both the garden and the heart. Well, the beautiful moon right now on Wednesday the 18th of March is still a dark moon, which means for Ostara and our spring equinox on Friday the 20th, we will have a new moon sharing the energy with us. How frickin' cool, right? How perfect. Because think about what the spring equinox represents. It's the moment when the earth begins its growing season again, right? Seeds are going into the soil, the land is waking up, the entire natural world is preparing for new life and fresh beginnings. And the new moon, it carries that exact same energy. In lunar magic, the new moon is the phase where we set intentions and plant ideas and, begin new cycles. It is the point in the month where we step forward into something fresh. So this year we have something really special happening. The newness of spring and the new moon energy of March arriving together at the same time. It is it's just like the universe is giving us a giant cosmic green light. If there was ever a moment to plant a seed, whether that's in your garden, your magical practice, your work life, your personal dreams, this is a really beautiful window to do it in. The earth is ready. The moon is ready. And honestly, I think we all might be a little ready too. So, how can we actually work with this energy as witches right now? Because, oh my goodness, having the new moon and the spring equinox lining up together is like getting two invitations at the same time, one from the moon and one from the earth. And both of them are saying the same thing. It is time to begin something. One of the easiest ways to work with this moment is simply by setting intentions. New moons have always been a beautiful time to write down the things we want to call into our lives. And when that energy overlaps with the beginning of the growing season, those intentions carry a little extra symbolism, really. You're not just wishing for something. Well, we never wish for things, do we? We are planting a seed. Another way to work with this energy is through simple ritual. That could be lighting a candle and speaking your intentions out loud. It could be writing your goals in your grimoire. It could even be stepping outside and literally planting something in the soil as a physical symbol of what you want to grow in your life. Witches have always loved working with symbolism, and this moment in the year, well, it is just full of it. You can also work with cleansing and fresh starts. The dark moon leading into the new moon is a wonderful time to release things that feel heavy or outdated. Old habits, old worries, old patterns that just don't belong in the next chapter of your life. Think of it like clearing a little patch of soil before you plant something new. And honestly, some of the most powerful ways to work with this energy are very simple, just like we've talked about today. Go outside, touch the earth, notice the returning light. Write down one or two things you truly want to nurture this year. That's it. Well, my friends, my witchy work wishes family, I hope the rest of your week is amazing and the spring equinox and Ostara celebrations this weekend are just everything you and your practices need. I will be thinking about you and sharing all of my best wishes for a magical weekend. Have fun, and I will talk with you next week. Thank you for joining me today at Witchy Work Wishes, a place to find your weekly inspiration for bringing your personal witchcraft practice into your business, work, and office. For more information and additional content, please visit me online at witchyworkwishes.com. If you want to send me a personal note, please email me at info@witchyworkwishes.com. And of course, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Just search for Witchy Work Wishes.